Vladimir Putin has increasingly relied on the Wagner Group, a private and unaccountable army, to pursue Russia's foreign policy objectives across the globe. For nearly a decade, a shadowy network of Russian mercenaries connected to the Kremlin wreaked havoc in Africa, the Middle East, and most recently Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin has increasingly relied on the Wagner Group as a private and unaccountable army that enables Russia to pursue its foreign policy objectives at low cost and without the political backlash that can come from foreign military intervention. In recent years, governments in the Middle East and Africa hired the fighters to crush insurgencies, protect natural resources, and provide security, committing grave human rights abuses in the process, according to international watchdogs. In Syria, Wagner fighters were filmed gleefully beating a Syrian army deserter with a sledgehammer before cutting off his head. In the Central African Republic, United Nations investigators received reports that the mercenaries raped, tortured, and murdered civilians. In Libya, Wagner allegedly booby-trapped civilian homes with explosives attached to toilet seats and teddy bears. Last month, German intelligence officials linked Wagner mercenaries to indiscriminate killings in Ukraine. The Kremlin officially denies any connection with the activities of Russian mercenaries abroad, and much about Wagner's structure and leadership remains unclear. But experts say that Wagner's top officers have participated in meetings between foreign leaders and top Russian officials. They also say the Russian Air Force has transported Wagner fighters to launch the group's international missions. Wagner has spread around the world, particularly in Africa, because it presents an enticing package to leaders of embattled nations, experts said. It offers to quash terrorism and rebel threats with brutal military crackdowns, while rallying public support for their government clients through disinformation campaigns. In Africa, American efforts to persuade governments not to work with Wagner have generally been late and ineffectual, the official said. U.S. diplomats have been surprised when Wagner arrives in a faltering country, leaving them scrambling to counter the group's influence with limited tools and incentives. During the Cold War, America's policy of containing the spread of Soviet communism led to a substantial investment in courting African leaders, offering developmental aid, university exchange programs, even concerts. But when the Berlin Wall fell, so too did the U.S. government's interest in the African continent. Embassy staff shrank, programs shriveled. The most visible U.S. effort to keep Wagner out of a specific country transpired in Mali, where the mercenaries arrived last December to fight jihadists rampaging in the north. Malian President Assimi Goïta had recently come to power in the latest of a series of coups that prompted international sanctions. But the entreaties from Townsend and other U.S. officials were unsuccessful. Former diplomats say the effort was part of a troubling pattern where American officials parachute into complex situations equipped with little more than talking points. Africa Command declined to comment. In March, the French newspaper Le Monde reported that Wagner mercenaries had participated in the torture of civilians, including by electrocution, while working with Malian soldiers. Last month, Human Rights Watch issued a detailed report accusing Russian fighters of participating in a massacre of roughly 300 civilians during a military operation. The killing began at a crowded cattle market on March 27 and continued for several days. In a statement, State Department spokesman Ned Price said, "We are concerned that many reports suggest that the perpetrators were unaccountable forces from the Kremlin-backed Wagner Group." The Malian government has said that the Russians are helping their military as formal instructors, and that their army killed 203 terrorists and arrested 51 more during the operation. The Wagner Group first attracted public notice in 2014, during the Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine. Its mercenaries fought alongside Russian Federation forces, attacking Ukrainian forces in the still contested Donbass region. Wagner operates through a web of shell companies controlled by the Russian oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, a food industry magnate with close ties to Putin. Sardonically referred to as Putin's chef, Prigozhin has vehemently denied his involvement in the group, supposedly named after the German composer, a favorite of one of the mercenaries' alleged commanders. Efforts to reach Prigozhin were not successful. Experts say the Wagner Group appears to be paid in proceeds from natural resources like oil, gold and diamonds in countries where they are fighting. The Kremlin has used them as a cheap alternative to Russian armed forces. In 2015, Russia sent its military to fight in the Syrian civil war on behalf of the dictator Bashar al-Assad. It was the Kremlin's first armed intervention outside former Soviet territories since the end of the Cold War. Soon, Russian Federation forces and fighters from Wagner and other mercenary groups helped tilt the war in Assad's favor. In 2019, Wagner began to fight in the Libyan civil war, supporting a campaign by the warlord Khalifa Haftar to overthrow the country's internationally recognized government. Haftar had appeared to be faltering, but, together, Wagner and rebel fighters launched a new offensive that brought their combined forces to the outskirts of Tripoli. As the Ukrainian conflict drags on and the Kremlin becomes further isolated from the global economy, experts say that Wagner is likely to play an increasingly important role in Russian foreign policy. The Wagner Group's expansion could help Russia evade the impact of sanctions, entice governments to support it in the UN General Assembly and secure strategic positions in its fight against the NATO alliance. Economically, Russia pales in comparison to superpowers like China and the United States. But in the Wagner Group, officials said, Russia has found a cheap and novel foreign policy tool that America has yet to find a way to address. Client governments appear to absorb most of the cost,